Hi, my name is Darren Joseph from HUJ.tax, and we're the team that seeks to demystify that sometimes confusing world of international tax. And today I want to talk about the Indian Ocean in general, but Mauritius, Réunion Island, and Madagascar in particular. For a number of reasons, some of which I will touch on, the Indian Ocean is becoming increasingly popular, and it's a part of the world that was basically off grid if you spoke to people in general like a decade or two ago. But now there's peculiar and particular interest in the region, and for a number of reasons, right? For me, who spent a huge chunk of the last decade or more in Southeast Asia, I couldn't help but find that there are similarities between my home, where I spent a lot of time in Southeast Asia, as well as compared to the Indian Ocean. And here's what I mean by that. So I've been based primarily in Singapore, as you know, if you've been watching these videos, reading the articles on my website. And Singapore is undoubtedly the economic heartbeat of Asia. Now, what is not always well known from the outside is how closely integrated the economies of Singapore, Malaysia, and Indonesia are. I mean, not just economically, but historically, linguistically, culturally, so therefore socially. They are distinct and independent jurisdictions, but they are strongly related and integrated with each other. Similarly, I've observed, perhaps not as strong, but a tight bond between Réunion Island, Mauritius, and Madagascar. So in terms of the comparison, Réunion Island is kind of like Singapore in that it's the most developed. It's infrastructure-wise, in terms of the financial economy, banking, etc. And of course, it helps that it is basically a part of Europe, being one of the dom-toms or a département of France. So it's basically France in the Indian Ocean. So of course, a very developed infrastructure, a very developed jurisdiction. And Mauritius is kind of like Malaysia, and Madagascar is very much like Indonesia. Every natural resource you can imagine, relatively underdeveloped in terms of infrastructure and so on, lots of potential. We recently did a series of videos as well as some articles on the website about Mauritius. We spoke to, because I spent some time in Mauritius last year. So we've taken the opportunity to interview some service providers and talk about the Mauritius advantage, right? And subsequently, I applied for residency myself, and I obtained residency in principle. And I obtained approval in principle pursuant to my application for residency. It's just one of those things I like to geek out on. I like collecting second residences and second passports. What I wanted to comment on in terms of Mauritius, again, a fantastic jurisdiction. I am absolutely in love with it, but it needs to be something you need to really think through. It may not be for everyone. One of the biggest challenges that I found is, as with anywhere, so I'm not picking on Mauritius, one of the biggest challenges is banking. What do I mean by that? So one needs to be careful, and this is where the tax planning comes in, because Mauritius isn't exactly a tax haven. You're taxed on the remittance basis. So unlike Singapore, which is closer to a pure territorial tax, of course there are exceptions, Mauritius will tell you, okay, what arises outside of Mauritius, that's up to you, but if it's remitted into Mauritius, it's going to be taxable. Of course, so therefore to optimize, you want to minimize what you bring into Mauritius. Now, the banks are saying the opposite. The banks are saying, we know that the amounts you need to bring in are a certain amount from an immigration point of view to qualify, but our requirements are deliberately higher because we're a bank. We're trying to make some money here, which I respect. Everybody's running a business. But it does create a bit of a conflict where the minimum requirements for many of the banks are much higher than the immigration requirements are financially. So their incentive is really to get you to bring as much money in as regularly as possible. And I found that to be a bit contrarian to my own best interest in terms of tax optimization. But of course, again, this is not necessarily a criticism. I understand where they're coming from. They're trying to run a business. Perhaps the typical client that they deal with, because Mauritius has been quite popular with Ukrainians, to a lesser extent Russians, as well as South Africans. And relative to those jurisdictions, perhaps banking in Mauritius is a more attractive, or could be a more attractive option. So it's worth it, right? But if you're coming from Europe or North America, if you're coming from Singapore or something, where you have superior banking options, why would you take a step down into a weaker bank in with greater foreign exchange risk, etc. So again, for the right person, Mauritius could absolutely be worth it. But, just get proper advice before you make that step. Réunion, I've spent time there last year, and I'm going to be back there later on this year again. Fantastic jurisdiction. And just like most things to do with France, nobody moves to France for tax reasons. It's purely quality of life. And you understand that to purchase that quality of life, you need to take a hit tax-wise. Same as it is in the metropole, same as it's going to be in Réunion. You're going to be in a beautiful part of the world, but to enjoy the first world infrastructure in an emerging market, to enjoy first world infrastructure in a neighborhood which is still emerging, you need to purchase that by buying into the higher tax rates that you're going to be paying in Réunion. But it is definitely worth it. The dark horse, the so-called dark horse, is of course Madagascar, which, like as I mentioned, compared to Indonesia, it has its challenges. I've applied for residency and been successful in Madagascar as well. Fantastic place to explore, especially if you enjoy real freedom. Again, there's no infrastructure, but for the most part, the government just leaves you alone for those who want that. Closeness to nature, fresh air, fresh fruits. Once you're outside of the major urban area, which is Antananarivo, it is a really beautiful part of the world, but there are no penguins, so forget the cartoon, right? From a tax point of view, Madagascar, not very tax efficient, the bureaucratic side of things, as it is in many emerging markets, where there's a lot of paperwork to, set up company, do banking, which is a problem everywhere, but to set up your company, immigration point of view, and the tax regime is pretty aggressive and not very encouraging. But again, with proper tax planning, getting the right advice, it can work for the right arrangement, for the right individual, for the right circumstances. My name is Darren Joseph from HEJ.tax.